to Mr. Bob's Builds. This is the first in what I intend to be a series of videos about the building of the World War I British 18-pounder quick-firing field gun model. My aim is to place this in a diorama with a crew and hopefully some other figures. In today's episode I have a look at the kit for the gun, talk about my processes for working with white metal and put the gun together. And I hope that you find something of interest to you. The gun is made by WD Models. There's a link in the notes. It is a 4mm scale model, or 1/76. It is all made from white metal, apart from 3 very small hand wheels, which are made of resin. A fully detailed set of instructions can be downloaded from WD Models' website. And here the contents of the box have been laid out on the parts list from those instructions. I've worked with white metal in the past, and I'm pleased to be able to report that these are fine examples of the model caster's craft. As ever, some cleanup is required, but the details are crisp and there's very little by way of pitting or other casting imperfections. I'll talk a bit more about the history of this gun in future episodes, but I'll note here that the maker has very thoughtfully provided optional parts to build this particular gun in the various stages of its life. My plan is to build this as it was in August and September 1914, when the British Expeditionary Force first arrived in France and Belgium. Before moving on to showing you this model being built up, I thought I'd spend a bit of time talking about the methods I use to work with white metal. As always, if you don't fancy listening to my jibber jabber, skip to the end where you'll see all the metal parts glued together. Basically, white metal is a tin-lead alloy with other metals added. It has a relatively low melting point, which means that rubber moulds can be used. Depending on the makeup of the particular alloy used, parts can be either stiff and brittle or soft and bendy, but all present similar problems, and here you see my toolkit for working with white metal. I'll be talking about some of these in a bit more depth, but working from left to right you'll see 3 small pin vices with a scriber, a drill and a glue applicator, sanding sticks, needle files and a larger file, metal snips, handy brush for wiping down the work surface, razor saw and model knives, glass fibre brushes, and lastly a suede brush made from brass. Next up we have a few videos which are my usual dodgy quality. The metal used to mould these is very soft. So if I just pick this up here, it's easily bendable with the finger. Now that's an indication of how tricky it is with smaller parts as you get into the build, because things are just so easy to bend. To clean up, it's just like with a plastic model. You snip nearly to where the part is, and then come in with finer cleaning tools later. I'm not going to do all of this on camera, but what I will do is if I take these shields off, that one goes flying off across the bench, and then use this moulding bar to show how I work with white metal. What we have there then is a piece of scrap white metal. White metal is quite soft, so you can shave it with a knife, being careful not to cut your fingers on camera. Or you can come in with your files, either big files or needle files, depending on how much metal you have to take off. I'm going to start off with the big thing, just to show you a few things. If you look at the file there and the piece of metal, it rubs down very quickly. But also, if you see there, it leaves a residue of metal on your file, so you have to be careful of that. Do the same with the needle file. And you come in to get rid of the file markers you left with your previous file. Then if you look at the files, you'll see quite a lot of white metal residue on the teeth of the files. And that's quite easy to get rid of with a brass brush. This is a suede brush from a shoe repair shop. It's a very useful tool to have. That cleans that up. And that partly cleans that up. Because you know you're going to get metallic residue on your files, a good approach which engineers use and modelers is to rub your file with a piece of chalk. Then you can file away to your heart's content. And that wears the chalk away, but what it also does, it makes it a lot easier to get the residue out with your brush. Once your file is clogged up, it doesn't file particularly well. There's been an interesting thread on International Scale Modeler Forum about whether or not to clean plastic sprues before building a model. I like to, although it's not for painting purposes, it's to ensure that the surfaces are clean to accept glue. It's vitally important with white metal to do that, because they're shorter run models. They use a mould release which leaves a residue on the white metal, and it's important to clean that off, especially before you paint it, but certainly before you glue it. Now, these parts have all had a clean as soon as I received them, and the act of cleaning them up with a knife or a file is usually sufficient to make sure the glue attaches as well. But as a sort of a belt and braces approach, with white metal, it's very useful to rub the gluing surfaces with a glass fibre brush. And here it's a pen type brush, which is propelling, so it goes up and down. This one's nearing the end of its life. It's got a replaceable tip in it. And then rub the surfaces to be glued with the glass fibre brush. Actually, if we come here where the white metal is dull, and I give that a good brushing, it becomes very, very shiny in short order. Now that means, of course, that the surface of the metal is wearing away to produce that shine, which means you don't want to go too rough with your glass fibre, because you'll start to lose detail. Now, that's one version of the glass fibre brush. This is a second one, which is a big thick job with tape round it, which you take off as the glass fibre wears down. And then that's nice and clean, ready for either glue or actually paint as well. But you will see there's residue now where I've been working. Normally I'll be working on the mat, but I'm doing this on the paper just for illustration. And that mess there is made up of the chalk from the file. It's made up of the white metal parts which have come off with the scraping and the filing. But also now there's particles of glass fibre on there which have worn away when I've used the glass fibre pen and the stick. Habit says that when you clean your mat off, you drag your hand across into your bin. I'll do it on a clean part. Just move that away, make sure there's nothing there, and you move your fibres away, your debris away with your hand. If you do that when you've been working with white metal and glass fibre, you're going to get little bits of metal and glass fibre stuck in your skin, and it is extremely irritating. So that's where the big puffy makeup brush comes in. And you brush the debris away rather than scooping it away with your hands. And then at the end, make sure that you knock all this crap out of your brush. And that keeps your hands nice and safe. Right, I'm going to clean that up and then we're going to move on to the next bit. To stick white metal I'm going to be using CA glue. You can also use quick gluing epoxy or slow gluing epoxy if you've got a bit of patience, which I haven't. You can also solder it, but these parts are far too fine for that. I've made a few model wagons in the past with white metal, and if you use a bit of low melt solder and a bit of courage and a lot of flux, you can solder it quite successfully. But because white metal melts at a very low temperature, these parts are fine, so I'm going to be using CA. This is a 4mm scale London South West Railway meat van that I built some years ago. This is all white metal and the main body parts were soldered together. However, as with the gun, small detail parts were glued with CA. I've got a CA glue applicator here, which is a needle with the end snipped off and then stuck into a pin vise, and it makes a very, very good, precise CA applicator. If you saw the February edition of the International Scale Modeler news roundup, you should do if you haven't, because it's probably the best, well, I think it's the best of the general modelling shows every month. Paul demonstrated an applicator from FlexiFile, which is very similar to this in that it's a metal rod with a gap at the end, which then holds the CA glue and allows precise application. I mean, we do use cocktail sticks, etc., but it's sometimes difficult to get a precise puddle of glue where you want it. The needle of choice is a tapestry needle or a cross-stitch needle, because they have a long eye, and you can snip the top off with some hard wire cutters and it makes a very, very decent CA applicator. The other end of the tapestry needle is quite blunt, so you're not going to damage yourself with that. But and then put that in a pin vise and you've got a very nice glue applicator. Well, I'm going to glue some bits together. I've got a puddle of glue in my preferred receptacle, which is a beer cap with a bit of blue tack underneath to keep it steady on the workbench. And you can then dip that in, and there's a puddle of glue in the eye of the needle. You can then add that to your piece, just here, just add a little. And this is two pieces of scrap, which I'm just going to add together. Hold it until it sets. This is medium viscosity, so it sets. It takes a little bit of time to set and move away, and you've got your two bits glued together. If you can hear tapping in the background, I've got a nesting box on the outside of my workshop, my shed. Workshop is a very smart word for it. And we put the nesting box up there and some tits are moved in. And the little sods don't like the hole in the box, and they're making it bigger. And it's like having workmen outside with a pneumatic drill. Ah, stop now, that's good. So, there we go. That's on there, and that would be sufficient for my needs. On the subject of needles, I'm a big fan of leather needles, or glover's needles they're called. I'll put a link to this particular set in the notes. The thing I like about these needles is that they're incredibly hard and incredibly sharp, but they have a triangular profile, which makes it very useful firstly for scribing, and secondly for doing things like, let's take our scrap again, coming in and just marking a pilot hole, and you can twist that round and it starts a nice little hole, which means then you can come along with your very fine pin vise and drill bit, and you can start that hole off without it slipping all over the place, and then it's then started for a bigger needle. a bigger drill. So there we go. That's the glover's needle, and it's a fantastic bit of kit. It scribes beautifully. It acts as a you can enlarge holes with it. If I find the bit I've just been working on here, for example, there was a bit of flash inside those two bits, and you can get your needle in, and because it's triangular, you can then use it to clean up as well. Glover's needle, tapestry needle, free, you know, they're cheap as chips and very useful. Now the glue is set up on that because I didn't wipe it off when it was wet. Oh, that's okay. If it sets up in there and you're getting globs of glue on the paint, just put a bit of flame underneath it, it'll burn off. I don't think it's particularly healthy to do that, but it works very well. And when that breaks, because it will break because you'll use it for something you shouldn't, and that big being hard metal, it'll snap quite easily. You can just take that one out, chuck it away, get your next tapestry needle in line, snip the end off, and off you go again. I'll add a link to a UK source of these needles in the notes. I have to say that they are dead cheap. The packs of 25 can be had for a couple of quid for the tapestry needles and about £4 for the leather needles. Packs with just a few in them are less than £1 each. Needle sizes are confusing. The descriptors for the tapestry needles and leather needles are both different, and it's different in most of the other ranges too. I use Glover's needles in sizes 3 and 7, with size 3 being the bigger and 7 the smaller of the two you see in the photo. For tapestry needles I liked sizes 20 to 24. Right, let's get building. The instructions recommend putting things together in sections. So pole brake, shield and barrel were built separately. Here you see the pole brake on the instructions there. The shield is actually there to hold it up to add a bit of elevation. The lighter coloured bits are the resin control wheels. All the parts fit very nicely together, although I did drill out the control wheels and pin them to the model. And this is the barrel. The two loose parts you see are, the one on the top is the breech, which I'm going to model in the open position. And the other part is the gun layers shield, which is meant to be attached to the end, as you see in the diagram at the top. However, I managed to knock this off. No surprise there. I'll glue those two loose bits on at a later stage. At the top of the barrel, you can see the recuperator and recoil mechanism. On the real thing, that's filled with a large spring and oil. The spring to compress when the round is fired, and then return it to the extended position. The oil slows the either end of that rapid process. The squarish block at the end of the recoil mechanism is an oil reservoir which was fitted later on in the war. This was added to alleviate the oil loss which was found in the original design, which is the round bit at the end of the model part. Some crews added rope to the end of the recuperator in an attempt to cool the oil parts down. I think this adds a bit of visual interest, so I've attempted to do this with some twine, which is the black part you see on the model. I'm not yet sure that I'm pleased with that, so whether or not it will appear on the end model is still up for debate. But when painted white against the bare metal and War Department green, it would certainly look interesting. Oh, and I should add that the front of the barrel was drilled out to 1.2 millimeters, and the breech end was drilled out to 1.8 millimeters. Here the shield has been added to the pole trail. The kit includes nicely detailed storage compartments to add to the shield. And here the main components have been fitted together with white tack. This is to test fitting and also to ensure that the fixing parts are cut to the correct length according to the desired elevation of the gun. At this stage, the barrel, the shield and the pole trail have all been glued together. The traversing lever has been added to the end, and the telescopic sight has been glued into place. The wheels might look a bit wonky, but they're just white tacked on, not glued yet. And that's just about as far as I'll go at this stage, I think. I've added a Tammy bottle just to show the size of this thing in scale. And here's some close-ups of the parts of the gun. It's really quite detailed for the scale. I've glued on the breech in the open position and also the shield on the left-hand side. I think they're going to be a bit delicate, so they'll need careful handling. Looking at these photos, it looks like those hand wheels might be a bit wonky. I might have to deal with those. Well, that's just about it for this episode. I hope that in the next episode I'll have this gun primed and that work will have started on the figures. In the last week or so, WD Models has brought out a splendid looking limber to go with this gun, so I might just have to put my hand in my pocket and buy that too. They've also brought out a 6-horse gun team, but I think that might have to wait for another day. So, it's goodbye for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you'll come back soon.